Hi lovely folks, welcome back. It's finally time. We are on the home straight and ready to finish our simple kirtle or dress. Yay! In this episode, I'm going to talk to you all about hemming your garment. Firstly, we're going to look at taking off any excess we've got at the bottom from the gores, and then we will look at rounding off the points where the main body meets the gores. You'll have a little bit of a point. We'll look at rounding that off to get a nice smooth edge to work with when we're hemming. Once we've done that, we're going to pin the whole thing into place before we start sewing. This bit's really important, as it means we can spread the excess evenly around the whole circumference of the hem, and you won't get any really annoying, awkward, bunched up bits that are frustrating to work with later. Once the whole lot is pinned, we are going to stitch all the way around with a rip stitch. Dead simple. Exactly the same as we did for the cuffs. So let's get started. At the end of the last episode, I showed you what all of these hems looked like, all smoothed out, laid together, ready for cutting. Since then, these have hung for a couple of days, just to let everything settle into place. It's always worth doing when you're making a garment, just to make sure all the fibres are where they want to be. Everything's been pulled about a lot in the process of making this garment, so give it a chance to rest, and then we'll tackle these final hems. So turn your garment inside out, it's much easier to work that way. And then we're going to lay it flat and make sure that everything is exactly where we want it to be. Now starting off, you can feel under the gussets here, match up those two joins there so that those are equal each side. There's a lot of weight, especially in the wool garment now, that can pull all of this out of place. Don't worry, we're going to take it step by step and get everything laid nice and neat at the end. To have a feel, once you're happy that those are equal, I pop a clip in each side just temporarily to encourage the fabric to stay in the right place. Smooth everything down, make sure everything's sitting nice and equal, both sides. It will get a little bit tricky when we come to these parts here. Don't worry, just take it slow. As you've done each section of the garment, slide it up and then pop another clip in just above the gores here, keeping everything exactly equal back and front. Once you've done that, gently lay this top part down over there so that you can slide it all up, and then we're going to work our way down these gores, making sure that these seams match up on each side. I can feel the underneath seam there. I need to bring that across and secure that. Have a look at your seam here. What you should see is just the joining stitches right along the edge there. It will want to wiggle around a little bit. Come on you. And smooth it out, smooth it across. Sometimes if your gores are not quite equal on each side, there's going to be a little bit of pull. So if they don't match up, use your two main body seams and match to those. Each time you complete a section, just fold it down, slide it up again so you've got all that you want to work with.
Mother night, sacrifice. Mother night, sacrifice.
That can take a little while until you're happy with it. It is quite difficult with heavy fabrics. It's a little bit easier with linen. Work your way down and make sure that everything is laying where you expect it to. If you followed my cutting plan and you followed my step-by-step guide all the way through, everything should line up fairly closely, especially if you rolled all this length up and kept it protected during the sewing process, because this part getting pulled about and stretched is most often what ends up making this hem uneven at the bottom. So fingers crossed all of that has gone smoothly, and we are going to be ready to start trimming this hem ready for pinning. Once you are happy with all the placement, you're happy that everything is nice and equal, then it's time to come and trim these pieces ready to pin them. So the first thing that we're going to go and do is grab your scissors and just snip off any of these loose or fraying threads just at the edge here, getting rid of anything that's going to complicate the process. Now on our wool garment, we used up the excess from our gores at the top so that these met as closely as possible at the bottom. And that means we haven't got an awful lot to do here. What you will find is you'll have these ends left over from when you were doing your felling. So just trim them off. Easy peasy. Now if you think about most skirts and dresses, they don't have a strong angle like this in their hems. In order to make this hem really nice and easy to pin and easy to sew, we're going to round off this corner ever so slightly before we start pinning it. Take off this point here. Now the sharper the angle that you have here, the more you're going to have to take off to round this. We're going to do it hopefully in 3 nice straight lines, just to curve off this and make it easier to ease everything in. Because if you try folding this up, which is how we're going to do our double turned hem, and then you try folding here, what you're going to find as you're getting close to here is you've got a lumpy bit, and you can just tuck that in and try and ease it in that way, but you will end up with a slightly lumpy hem, which may affect how your garment lays. So just doing this quick step here can make that all a lot easier. We don't need to do anything with this end. This is a straight edge all the way along. That will hem beautifully. The points that we're going to be focusing on are where the main body meets the gores, because we have got this angle as the skirt swings out. So the first thing that I want to do is just take off this pointy bit here. I'm not going to take off an awful lot. If you pop your ruler on, did it like that, you'd end up with a sharp curve here. We don't want to lose very much at all from here. So we're going to come down, have a look at both sides. It's about 3.5 inches. That's about 3.5 inches. Lovely. If you haven't got a rotary cutter, this is what I'm going to use to do it. You can mark these with a very light line, whatever you use for marking your fabric, and come in and do it afterwards with your scissors. It's all going to be tucked in, so if it's a little bit rough and ready, it doesn't matter. Just make sure that you're coming the same width out from either side before you start cutting. So already you can see that that's easing in beautifully. What you'll find is you've got another little point here. So we're going to do the same again, taking that 3.5 inches each side and smoothing it out. 1, 2, 3, that's lovely. Trim off this little slither here. Once that's complete, we're going to do the same again with this one. We're going to count from where we cut 1, 2, 3.5 here. Half, 1, 2, 3. Now what we've got here is a much more even curve all the way along. It's not perfect and it doesn't have to be. So don't panic too much. Just make sure that whichever distance you need to cut to even that point out, you choose the same again for either side, and that should give you a reasonably gentle curve to work with. You need to do this for both sides. So I need to go and do the other one before we're ready to start pinning this hem. And when you're doing this, if you feel a little bit anxious about it, just try a tiny bit. Just do a little bit at first. What we've taken off there, it's about 1/2 inch, that's all. But it will make the job a lot easier. Take a little bit off at first, and then once you're more confident, you'll be able to gauge better how much you need to take off with each garment. When we look at the linen one, we've got something a little bit different to do with that one to begin to get to this stage. But for now, let's focus on this, get it done, and I'll be back in a moment.
Mother night, sacrifice. Mother night, sacrifice.
And once that's all done, we're ready to pin everything into place. Once you've got everything trimmed how you want it, take off all the other clips. You're going to need them for this section. A problem that often comes up when we are first starting with getting our hems neat is these curved parts where the line isn't straight. These parts here, which is the two sides of the gore, that's a dead straight line-ish. So it's not going to be any trouble at all when you're pinning it together. These bits here, where the gore meets the main body, are the trouble spots. So we're going to start with those. Makes it an awful lot easier if you've got them in place and then you're easing any difference in the fabric angle out through the rest of it, back towards these points where nothing is curved. So to begin, you're going to want 3 clips. If you've got a mixture of different clips or pins, use your strongest ones for the middle here. The first thing that we're going to do is get everything turned once along this curve. So come out to about 1.5 to 2 inches away, give it room to breathe. Turn it once, whichever seam allowance you're using. Do the other side. And then we're going to come to this middle part and turn it twice. You may want to make a slightly shallower turn at this point because that does also help ease everything into place. And then once it's done, you very carefully tuck in and double turn either side as well. Pop your clip off or your pin out, whichever you're using. You can use either. Clips are much faster, but pins are an option if that's what you've got. Then double turn again. Till you're happy with how all that's sitting. I'm going to do the same again for the other 4 of these joins where the main body meets the gore. I'm going to go around, get those in place, and then we'll get the rest of it pinned. Something to consider if you're working with wool and you want to do just a single turn all the way around, that's also an option. You can bring it in. This bit will be ever so slightly shallower. Just have everything with a single turn, and again use your cord along the edge if you wish. You can use whichever hemming stitch you like. Herringbone is an excellent choice for this area because it will give extra protection to that raw edge. What you need to bear in mind is when we trimmed off here, we cut through the stitching. You would have secured your stitching at the bottom of this run, but that stitch is no longer in place. So what you may wish to do here is just pop a couple of stitches in either side to keep everything together and just whip stitch over that cut end there to make sure nothing is going to fray once it's turned up. We will be whip stitching over it during the hemming, but if I'm using a single turned edge, that's what I do to make sure that it's not going to fray. If you're double turning your edges like we are here, all of that is going to be contained inside, so it's not a concern. I'm going to get the rest of these corners done, and then I'll be back to show you how I get the rest of the hem nice and secure, ready for sewing. Once those cardinal points are in, it's time to do the lengths between them. The hem of this garment is going to take a fair bit of clipping and pinning. My advice would be use everything you've got, get everything pinned as well and as firmly as you can. As I said before, you can use clips or you can use pins. If you're using pins, you're going to have to pin, take it out, and then take it out again to pop it in there and pop it along. You can't really use the perpendicular pinning trick with these hems because it won't hold properly, so you are going to have to pin along. But if you've got clips, grab them and use them for this stage. I begin by sorting my clips into piles of 4, as equal as I can. I may need to adjust as I go along, but we can work that out when we get there. Bonus clip. Now we're going to put one pile to the side, or rather we're going to put 3 piles to the side and just focus on using one for each section of the garment. If you've got different types of clips, take your strongest ones, and we're going to use those to mark the midpoint and then roughly a quarter of what we've got left to ease into the hem. So whichever seam allowance you're choosing, whether it's a full inch and you're taking big bites, or you're going to try and get it as thin as you can with this wool, it's about that. That's what I'm going to be able to get away with. And pin in your midpoint first. Double turn that one. For the others, I'm just going to pop a single turn in, because in order to get this all nice and neat, we need to ease some of it in. You can see there's a bit of a bulge there. We're going to have to work on that. Maybe adjust this clip a little bit more. Either way, this part is about feeling what your fabric wants to do and adjusting for any lumpy bumpy bits you've got that aren't working quite as well as you want them to. Let's have a look how many we've got here. That should be plenty. We've got a few more we can play with if necessary. So the next step is to get everything pinned single turn, and then we're going to double turn the whole lot before we move on to the next section. This bit up here will get tricky because that's already double turned. Just unfold it as much as you need to get that piece the right width. Don't think about the rest of the garment with each clip. just think about getting that section nicely worked and equally folded, so that when we come to flip this all over, it should behave fairly well. Once you've got your first turns into place, we're then going to double turn each section at a time. So starting with that midpoint you made between the side here and this one, we're going to fold this up, double turned. Keep it equal at first and then turn it back, working all the way along. Once you've done a section, make sure you're happy with where everything's being held. You may want to use clips closer together up here. See how you feel, see how your fabric is behaving. When we get to the linen example, you'll find it's an awful lot easier to turn everything up, press it with your fingers and get it to stay where you want it. When you're working with wool and you're trying to double turn it, it's a lot springier. I'm going to go along around every section of the garment doing exactly the same thing that I'm doing here. Pinning a few quarter points, folding it once and then easing everything in. We're going to work all the way around until that is all in place. If I hit any tricky bits, I'll stop and I'll talk you through it. As I'm getting to the end here, you can see what I'm doing between each clip. I'm spreading everything out between each one, making sure that every single section is laying flat. And imagine that it's all on its own, that you're just pinning that one little bit of fabric. And if you get each of those nice and flat, you should find that everything falls into place nice and easy at the end. Some of these clips are threatening to snap, which is really unfortunate. So you've got your first line in. What you can do is grab hold of your two double turned edges, give it a little pull and they'll all flip up like that. So you can easily see everything in its almost right place. Grab hold of your middle ones, divide up each section as you go. So we've divided the whole thing into 2, then 4. And then you're going to work on each section in between, getting that section smoothed in. Sometimes you will need to go back and redo bits if it's not playing very nicely. But most of the time, if you've followed all this step by step and you've cut everything carefully and you've protected it as you've worked, this bit won't be that difficult. It's just time consuming, going around each little one, making sure that you're happy with it. So like this one, just going to take it off, stretch those bits between ever so slightly, see where it wants to ping back to, and pop a clip on. We've eased up this curve by trimming a little bit out at the beginning. This area here is always the most difficult to get to lay nicely. But hopefully you won't find this too problematic. And yes, it may seem like an excessive amount of clips. I've actually got some taken up on another project at the moment. I usually pin even closer than this because it means that once I start sewing, all I've got to do is go along. I don't even have to think about it. I can pop something on the TV or a podcast or something and just chill. And even though it's repetitive, it's very soothing as well. Once you've done one section, again, you're going to come to the others, do that little trick, same again, hold on to the ones that are double turned, pull slightly, and they'll all pop up. Obviously, you can only do this with clips. It doesn't work very well with pins, but this is why I would highly, highly suggest that you grab some of these. And grab as many as you can, because they do break. They do not last forever, but they give very good service while they are alive. So I appreciate them very much. And that one's just popped. There we go. This is what happens when you sew loads and loads and loads of Viking kit to replace your equipment. Luckily, it doesn't cost nearly as much as a sword. You occasionally see the tragic death of well-loved swords on the battlefield. My clips can't really compare. However, if you do get one break, just very, very carefully ease it off. Sometimes you really have to manipulate it to get them off if they do pop, but fingers crossed, you won't have that problem for quite some time. And that is all done. Once you start sewing, if you've got any gaps that are bigger than you like, then you can use some of the clips you've already taken off to fill in the holes. Just see how you get on. I'm going to finish this particular hem with a really simple whip stitch. Just going to start on one side, right at the side of the gore. Leave yourself that bit, because those bits are the tricky bits. You may decide you want to go straight over them, which means starting there and working your way along. You may decide you want to start there, so that if something has gone a little bit wrong on the way around, you can just tuck it in like that and make your final stitch there. But if you've done all this pinning and all this careful work to get everything as even and nicely laying as possible, you shouldn't have to do that. Again, as we talked about with hemming our cuffs, hopefully you can remember back to that one. There are other options for hemming stitches. The other very common one is the herringbone stitch. So you're working that over that edge there, and the crisscrossing threads will hold that down really, really well. The other option is to add a cord and couch that down as you go along. I'm going to keep it simple on this one. I'm going to whip stitch all the way around it, and I'll be back to show you what it looks like when it's all finished. And here we are with our simple whip stitched hem all the way around the bottom. If we come in for a closer look, you can see that here, just where we've had those tricky points. It's ever so slightly uneven, but it makes a lovely gentle curve. There's no awkward bits bunching up because we took the time to do that little bit of trimming there. Again, you've got here where your gores meet at the sides, each little join. That bit can be a little bit tricky as it's thicker, but just take your time and pop a stitch in anywhere that needs it. Now, we talked about some different ways to finish these hems, with herringbone stitch or with a cord along the edge, just in here to protect that edge. Very useful if you're just doing a single turn, but if you're double turning, this simple whip stitch is your absolute best bet for your first set of kit. Now, you will notice I've gone round all of the other bits with this braiding. I would like to do that on the hem of this dress eventually. However, it's 2.5 meters in circumference now it's finished, because these gores are quite wide. does make it a really nice dress to wear, but it means making all that braid is going to take me quite some time, and I wanted to get this out to you as soon as possible. I will show you that if I ever get round to actually doing it. I hope to after Christmas. So now you've seen what this looks like finished, we're going to move on to our linen garment. There's a couple of extra things we need to do to get that ready for hemming. So we've talked about our woolen garment where we used any excess length in the gore at the top. Now we're going to look at this linen one, and we left the excess at the bottom this time, which means we've got a little chunk that we need to take off so that we retain the natural curve of the garment. So the first thing I do is I have a look at how much excess I've got. There's about 2 inches, give or take, maybe a slight amount more. So if you imagine we're going to come along here, if our garment was actually this long, how much excess would we have? So we've got around 2 inches. So if we look at this one here, we can say that coming across with this part here, on this dotted line I'm using here, that runs to just there, come up 2 inches, it's going to come to about there. But what we want to do is take off a parallel chunk of this so that we're retaining the natural curve of the garment given the width at this point in the gore. So I'm going to grab my tools and then we're going to get this bit trimmed off. First thing I'm going to do is pop some clips onto the garment to keep it where we want it. You saw how I got everything laid out like this with the woolen garment in the earlier chapter. We're going to do exactly the same thing again so that we're happy with where everything is laying before we start cutting. Just going to pop these few in to hold everything in place. I'll just take them out as I need to as we work on the garment. So first thing I do, I've decided to use this line on my cutting mat as my guide. I'm just going to have a little check here with my ruler to make sure I'm not being too over optimistic. These aren't exact. You can see there is a slight discrepancy. They're not 2 exact pairs because it does change ever so slightly from how you angle the top. And as you go down, if you've pulled the fabric a little bit tighter or left it slightly loose, by the end of a full gore that's coming down all the way from under the armpits to the floor, particularly with dresses, this is more of a problem, any slight discrepancy will get more magnified at the bottom. So don't worry about getting it exact, just get a nice rough idea of how much will need to come off. So that's about 2.5 there. 2.5 there, that comes to just over 6. So then if we use our ruler and just slide up, keeping it parallel all the way up and pop it down, this comes to just above 6. If you're not sure, check again. 2.5, just above 6. So we know that that is going to give us a nice curve. As I say, it doesn't need to be millimetre precise at this stage. You can be if you wish, but you don't have to be. So I'm going to get that trimmed off, and then we're going to do exactly as we did before with the woolen garment and just round this corner ever so slightly. So I'm going to take some of these clips out now because I need to manipulate the ruler all around this curve here. I'm going to have a look at how much we're going to want to take off. This is a more open angle than the first one by ever so slightly, so I don't think we'll need to take quite as much off, but we'll have a look and see what would work well. What we don't want to do is start trimming too close to this bit because then you end up with an angle at that point as well where you don't need one. So last time we used 3.5 inches. I'm just going to adjust that ever so slightly so it lines up nicely with one of the lines on my cutting mat. If you haven't got one of these, you're just going to have to do it by eye or draw yourself out a little grid if you want to as well. So if we go by 10 in the middle, if we take that much, how far is that going to come? Again, that's about 3.5 inches. That size works pretty well for most things, to be honest. But there will occasionally be times when it's not quite right. 1, 2, 3.5 to there. Just going to take off this little corner. And just as we did before, even though these points are really quite subtle, we're just going to take a little bit off again to make this as nice and gentle a curve as possible for when we're folding everything in and don't want any excess lumpy bumpy bits. 1, 2, 3. So that was where my aiming point was. I'm going to do the same again. And then the same again down here. Move any clips out of the way that you need to. Then line up your ruler. That was our point before that we cut to. I'm going to come to here. Similar amount off, keeping a nice, gentle, even line. So there we have a nice curve that's going to be so much easier to fold into this hem. When you're working with linen, you absolutely must double turn your hems. So we'll just look at that again before we get started with the sewing. I'm going to do the other side now. You can watch me do the same procedure again. I'll do it without talking so you can see how quick it actually can be when you just get on with it. So I'll be back in just a moment. And you can see there just how tricky it can get if your rotary cutter blade is getting blunt. Do the same again as we did on the woolen one, just trim off any excess little hangs of fabric to make it nice and easy for you to fold everything up. I'm going to be back in a moment. We'll get this pinned and then we'll get it sewn up. We're so close to having this garment finished. See you in a moment. Okay, we're now ready to do all this pinning. And we're going to do it in the same order we did it before. We're going to start with getting these difficult cardinal points done. These parts where the main body meets the gore, because this is potentially your most tricky bit. So we'll do those 4 and then we'll come back and start filling in everything in between. As you can see, I've trimmed all the little big frays off. It just makes it a bit easier when you're tipping and folding. There's a few tiny little ones there, but this is linen. You only have to look at it and it frays. So I'm going to begin just as before, pinning this section here, just turning the very first little fold. Don't press too much yet, because you're going to want to do that once you've got everything in place. Go around and check it all at the end. So first of all, let's just start on these corners. Now, when you're using these clips, if you make sure If you clip just the edge here, you're going to be turning this to the depth that you want it. Don't clip it right the way up, because then you can't turn. If you keep all the clips to the edge, even when they're double turned, it means that you can flip and manipulate the fabric better without getting unnatural strain on it. You can see as I'm doing this, I'm just playing with a bit of the fabric a bit further out to encourage it to turn naturally with no pulls right near this turn here. You will adjust these as you go round. Don't worry about getting everything absolutely spot on at this point. You have time to just play with it and make sure everything is where you want it before you proceed. Try and get these edges to line up. So that is your cut line here. I'm working inside out here. You can see as you're turning this hem under, your line of joining stitches, your line of whip stitches on the other side. Try to get that to fold back exactly on itself if you can, and then ease it in with the hem allowance here, rather than letting this pull from side to side. Sometimes it just won't do it. If your cut's a little bit funny or there's a little bit of excess there that needs taking up, it won't fold back exactly like that. But try and get it to if you can, because it will make your later work easier. I'm going to get those other 4 cardinal points popped in, and then we'll talk about doing the long lengths between them and getting those nice and even.
Mother night, sacrifice. Mother night, sacrifice.
As we're coming up to this last one, just remember again, I warned you that you'd cut through your stitching at the end here, so it may want to try and unravel. Some people choose to just pop a couple of stitches in that hem to hold it in place for this process. Don't normally need to, but if you're finding it's really problematic to you, just pop a little stitch in there so that it can be that little bit easier for you to get everything where you want it. There's plenty of opportunities to correct for anything you're not happy with. Taking the time to do this in a fashion that is right to your eyes will make you happier at the end, because it will be even nicer and neater. However, if you're a bit less picky than I am, then by all means just whack your hem up and crack on. But if you find yourself running into those points where it doesn't want to line up when you've sewed all the way around and you're left with a big bit you can't fit in at the end, that's when you'll appreciate this effort, because it's fiddly and it's a bit time consuming, but it's well worth the results. Now that's all done, we're going to start working on our other pieces and filling in all this extra stuff here. I separated all the clips I had into piles suitable for each section before I started, just as I did with the woolen example. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lay out a little sort of area here and have a look at where I'm going to have these clips. Now this is not quite as large of a hemline, so we are going to be able to come in a little bit closer with this one, which is nice. We can pin a little bit more frequently. So once again, we'll start with the middle, get that in, Then get the quarters in for the section that we're working on, and then proceed from there, making sure that we're spacing our clips nice and evenly all the way along and making the most of the equipment that we've got. If you're pinning, again, you can do this with pins by pinning along the seam line. You can't use that technique where you go in perpendicular. For a hem, it just won't hold properly. So if you haven't got enough clips, do this with your pins, or use your clips to get everything into place and then pop a pin in it, because you can do little sections. If you've only got a set of 10 clips, you can use those to get everything where you want it and then pop the pin in. So those are the first single turns. We're going to pop in all the single turns all the way along. This is where you can start just gently finger pressing your linen to encourage it to turn where you want it to. Just check your clips aren't coming over the edge there where you've turned, because you're going to need a little bit of excess room as well. So until you've double turned, you're really only just catching the very edge of that turn, so that you don't make more work for yourself later trying to even it out. Now, I don't think we need an extra one there yet. I can pop more of those in. With your first turn, you don't need to have all of your clips on. You can if you want to, but you can always leave a few spare at the end and just pop them where you think they're needed. So once all of the single turn is held temporarily in place, we're going to come back to this midpoint here where we've got another one of these joining seams. Get that folded and lined up as exactly as we can. Once that's done, we just need to fill in the rest. I'm going to do some of this for a while, give you some nice music to listen to, and I'll be back in a little while.
On Yggdrasil, Lord Odin hung, pierced by his spear. Above the well of earth he clung, in search of wisdom dear. 9 days and nights Lord Odin stayed, marked by sun and moon. For secrets great his sacrifice made, for magic of the runes. All-Father cast his eye to the well, he drank its waters clear, and unto him came knowledge of all, he found that wisdom dear.
Then I was enriched, and I became wise. I truly grew and thrived. From a word to a word, I was led to a word. From a word to a work, I was led to a work.
And there we have it. Our entire hem is pinned and ready to sew. It's really, really helpful getting this all done first. You're not going to get any unexpected surprises, and it makes the work itself much quicker as well. Because it's very easy, if you say, oh, I'm just going to do a little bit and I'll work along, you end up with more variation in size in the seam and occasional bits that don't want to sit nicely. As you're working along, clipping it all this in, if there's any bits you're not happy with, just undo them, play with them, just see how it's all fitting. If there's any bits that really don't seem to sit right, just sometimes a little bit of pressure outwards on the seam will bring it to where it's happy to sit. And when you press this at the end, that will help everything lay nice and neatly into place. So just as we did before, I'm going to whip stitch this all the way around with a simple whip stitch, and I'll be back to show you what it's like when it's all finished and pressed. And here we are with our linen example all finished. When I finished hemming the hem down here, I gave everything a really good press. These seams are going to last a lovely long time. I've really carefully stitched them to keep them strong. Taking your time with these will really pay off in the long run. Although this dress is really simple, that's absolutely perfect for your first garment. You don't need to do anything particularly fancy, especially with your undergarments. All you're really going to see of these is a little bit here at the sleeves and at the hemline. But having these well constructed, doing these first, practicing your stitching on a garment that's not going to be terribly visible is really worthwhile. This is a garment that would have been roughly washed, changed regularly, or as regularly as you could depending on your status. It's a utilitarian thing, but that doesn't mean that we can't take pride in making it as well as we can. And here we have our two finished garments. First of all, we've got our linen underdress here with those gussets that go right up under the gores, giving you plenty of room for movement. This garment would have been worn next to the skin, whether you're making tunic or dress length. And then we have the overdress, a simple garment with two side gores inserted at waist level. I've used a really lovely natural coloured plain twill weave here for this dress, and I've chosen to make the gores a fair bit wider for my overdress. You can see that here. This is why I used the phrase twirl tech in my video about putting in these gores. This dress is really lovely to move in, and having the gores inserted at the waist level gives it a little bit more shape as well. Coming in closer, we've got our two simple necklines. The first on our linen undergarment has a simple tie made with thread drawn from the fabric itself. The second, on our woolen garment, is designed to be worn with the brooch and has those reinforced patches either side of the keyhole slit. You could also choose to add a tie to this one as well. Or, if you're adding braid to the edges, extend that braid into a cord to make a tie. Down here at the cuffs, we've used a turned and carefully whip-stitched hem to secure our cuffs. I've double-turned my wool hem as well because it was quite prone to fraying. And I've added that decorative braid along the edge just to provide a little bit of extra protection from wear. And last but not least, we have the section we've just finished, our completed bottom hems, treated in just the same way as we've done our cuffs. Everything's neatly turned under and carefully secured with lots and lots of little whip stitches. And it is worth investing time in these hems because in fields they're going to take quite a battering and need a fair bit of washing, especially these pristine undyed linen ones. And don't forget, you can choose to add that decorative braid all around the bottom hem as well if you want to. These two garments, whether you're making tunic length or dress length, are going to be the core of your reenactment kit. I really encourage you to use these natural undyed colours for your first set. Not only will you be able to wear them in almost any place or time period through the Viking Age, the process of making them will teach you almost all the skills you need when you come to make your finer kit later on. So if you haven't already, start with your undergarment, hone your skills, and then make your first overdress or kirtle. You have the power. And we are done, folks. We made it. If you've been following along with the series, then you have all the information that you need to go from complete novice to confident sewer of a Viking Age kirtle or dress. Fantastic. Hopefully you've now got a really good idea of how these garments go together and you've gained some confidence in the basic stitches that you're going to need for your future Viking Age clothing projects. As always, please do ask any questions that you've got down in the comments, and look out for the upcoming Get Ready With Me video, where I'll show you what the 2 dresses that I've been making as we've gone along look like as part of a complete kit. We'll talk a little bit about the status and the background of the character that I'm building with this, and you'll get to see how that works and what you can choose to do with your bits. Thank you all so much for being here. Your feedback really helps me get better at what I do, and it helps me know what you would like to see from the channel in the future. So please do share your thoughts down in the comments. Now, if you've really enjoyed this series, you found it really helpful, and you'd like to say, oh yeah, cheers for that, by buying me a coffee, you can do using my Ko-fi page. The link is in the description for this video, and it's on the channel homepage as well. It is never necessary, but it's always very much appreciated. So I'm going to go have a rest, and then I'm going to get working on that Get Ready With Me video for you. So until then, enjoy your hemming process, enjoy basking in the fact that you have completed a Viking Age garment. Look after yourselves, and I will see you really soon. Bye folks.